I'm not even sure where to start. I don't usually post on Reddit, but I feel like I'm about to lose my mind here. So, here goes. My name's Chris, and I'm 32. My wife, Megan, is 29. We've been together since our mid-20s, got married 3 years ago, and I thought we were as solid as a couple could be. You know, all those perfect match comments people say at the wedding. I bought into it. Maybe I was too trusting, but as they say, hindsight is 20/20ths. So, Megan and I have always been pretty open about our personal lives, which is why this feels so surreal. Last month, I was scrolling through my phone when I stumbled on a link in her browser history that I did not recognize. Just one of those random things, but it didn't seem like her usual online shopping or recipe searches. It was a profile on one of those sites. You know the ones I mean, the kind where people make content for paying subscribers. I'll admit, my mind went to some pretty dark places right away, but I convinced myself that maybe she'd just been curious. The problem is, curiosity doesn't explain what I found next. I decided not to bring it up immediately because I thought maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Instead, I started paying more attention to the little things. It didn't take long to notice that Megan was spending a lot of late nights in our spare room, supposedly working on freelance projects. She's in marketing, so that's not unusual, but something just felt off. She'd shut the door, and if I even tried to peek in, she'd act surprised, annoyed even, like I was disturbing her. And she'd always have her phone or laptop tilted away from me. It was subtle, but enough to make my gut twist every time. Then came the day I found some equipment in our closet that I had definitely never seen before. Lighting rigs, a tripod, even a new camera, all things she'd never mentioned buying. When I asked about it, she brushed it off, saying she bought them to improve the quality of her freelance work. But something felt off. The cost alone was a red flag, given that she's usually careful about budgeting. To make things worse, she started getting these random cash deposits in her account, big enough to notice but just small enough to fly under the radar. I wasn't exactly snooping, or at least I told myself that, but we do share a joint account, and I couldn't help but notice the difference in our usual balance. When I asked, she got defensive and told me not to worry, that it was just some extra income from clients. But the numbers didn't add up. At this point, I was torn between confronting her and gathering more information. The thought that my wife might actually be out there, I can barely bring myself to say it, selling explicit videos or photos. It seemed impossible. Megan's always been a bit reserved. The idea that she'd go behind my back to do something like that is just too much to swallow. But the evidence was starting to feel undeniable. This whole situation has been messing with my head so much that I haven't been able to sleep right for days. Every time she heads into the spare room, I can feel this pit in my stomach. She's been lying to me. I'm almost certain of it now. But every time I work up the nerve to confront her, I back down. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm just being paranoid and it's all in my head? I feel like I need to get proof before I say anything. It's tearing me up inside, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to her freelancing than she's letting on. The paranoia's gotten so bad that I found myself doing things I never thought I'd do. I've started staying home from work more often, pretending to be sick or telling her I'm working remotely, all just to try and catch her in the act, to see what's really going on in that spare room. One day, I finally got a break, or so I thought. Megan was at her office for a meeting, and I saw my chance. I knew I probably shouldn't, but curiosity got the best of me. I went into the spare room and, for the first time, really looked around. Really looked. I found the tripod and lights tucked into the corner, but her laptop was what caught my eye. She usually kept it locked, but this time she'd left it open, or maybe I was just lucky. Either way, I went for it. I found a whole folder titled Client Content with dozens of videos and photos. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking as I clicked on one of the files. The preview was enough. She was wearing, let's just say, very little. Everything hit me at once. It wasn't just suspicions anymore. There it was, right in front of me. She was doing it. She was actually making explicit content. And it wasn't just one video. There were tons of them. It looked like she'd been at it for months. I couldn't even bring myself to watch more. I was disgusted, shocked, hurt, and confused all at once. What was I supposed to do? Slam the laptop shut and pretend I hadn't seen anything? I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, my mind spinning. Why hadn't she told me? Why keep this a secret from me? When Megan finally came home that night, I tried to act normal, but I could feel myself seething inside. She barely noticed. She just brushed past me with a quick, "Hey, how was your day?" and headed into the kitchen to make dinner. I couldn't believe the nerve of her, pretending like everything was fine while she was keeping this massive secret from me. I almost blurted it out right there, but something held me back. I didn't know if I wanted answers, or if I was just furious that she'd hidden this from me. The days that followed were absolute torture. Every time I looked at her, I saw her differently, like she was some stranger I'd let into my home. We'd have dinner together, go through the motions, but there was this giant wall between us now. I couldn't even bring myself to touch her, let alone hold a normal conversation. She seemed to notice, too, asking if something was wrong, if I was stressed at work. I'd just brush it off, but inside I was screaming. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I logged onto one of the websites I'd seen linked in her browser history, thinking maybe I'd find more. And sure enough, there she was. Her profile was right there, under some fake name, with pictures I recognized from her client content. The bio was carefully worded, but there was no doubt it was her. She'd racked up hundreds of followers, all subscribing and leaving comments I couldn't bear to read. I shut the laptop, feeling nauseous. The woman I thought I knew so well had been living this double life, right under my nose. And all for what? Money? Attention? Or was there something else? I couldn't wrap my head around it. But now that I'd seen it, there was no going back. This was real, and I had to figure out what I was going to do next. That night, Megan asked if I wanted to watch a movie together, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. A movie? Like we could just sit on the couch and watch some rom-com while she was secretly broadcasting herself to strangers online? I gave some excuse about feeling tired and went to bed early. In reality, I spent the whole night staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how everything had gone so wrong. The worst part was, I couldn't shake the feeling that if she'd just told me, I might have understood. Or at least, I wouldn't have felt so betrayed. But instead, she'd gone behind my back, creating this whole other life without me. It was like I was some fool sitting at home, completely clueless while she was out there putting herself on display for anyone with a subscription. The next day, I decided I needed a plan. I was tired of feeling like I was going crazy. I thought about confronting her outright, but I knew I needed more than just my word against hers. If I could catch her in the act, maybe then she'd have no choice but to come clean. So, I waited. I started keeping an eye on her schedule, noting when she'd slip into the spare room for hours or head out for meetings. And now, here I am, waiting for the right moment. Every part of me feels like it's falling apart, but I have to see this through. The tension in the house was like nothing I'd ever felt before. Every time she went into that spare room, I felt my stomach drop. My hands would shake, my palms would sweat, and the anger would rise up again like it had just happened for the first time. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that I'd get my chance. But it felt like I was running out of patience, and any second, I'd just lose it and explode. One night, Megan was putting in a late night in the spare room again. I had to know what was going on, and this time, I wasn't going to sit back and guess. I made up my mind to sneak a peek inside. With my heart pounding like a jackhammer, I crept down the hall and pressed my ear to the door. I could hear her talking softly. It sounded like she was responding to someone, and I froze as I realized she was probably live streaming. I didn't know whether to laugh at the absurdity or cry at the betrayal. It was one thing to find her videos, but seeing her interacting with strangers, putting herself out there in real time, it was almost too much to bear. I don't know what came over me, but I eased the door open just a crack, enough to see inside. She had her phone propped up, talking to the camera, adjusting herself, smiling, laughing, like she was a totally different person. The Megan I thought I knew never even looked at me like that. She'd been distant, barely interested in anything I had to say lately. But here she was, putting on a whole act for people who were probably just throwing money her way. I pulled back, swallowing the lump in my throat, and quietly closed the door. As I walked back to the living room, I felt hollow, like a shell of myself. I slumped onto the couch and buried my face in my hands, wondering how the hell my life had come to this. The person I'd committed to, the woman I'd planned to build a life with, had gone behind my back to share parts of herself I thought were only for me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to her come out of the spare room, shower, and slip into bed beside me like nothing had happened. The audacity made my blood boil, and yet, there I was, pretending to sleep just to avoid the confrontation. I was paralyzed, too shocked and angry to do anything. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The next day, I was a wreck at work. My coworkers asked if I was okay, and I just brushed them off, muttering something about being tired. It was all I could do to keep myself from venting the whole story right there. But I couldn't. I couldn't let anyone else know until I figured out what to do. When I got home, Megan was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like everything was perfectly normal. She looked up and gave me a smile, but it felt forced, fake even. The way she could act so natural, so unbothered, made me want to scream. I went straight to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and mumbled something about needing to take a shower. Once I was in the bathroom, I locked the door and pulled out my phone. I had this idea bouncing around in my head that maybe if I looked up her profile again, I'd find some answers, or at least figure out how far this whole thing went. I searched her username and scrolled through her page, looking at all the pictures and videos she'd posted. She was wearing outfits I'd never even seen before, posing in ways that would have made me blush if the situation were different. In the comments, they were disgusting, but I couldn't stop reading them, couldn't stop torturing myself. I must have been in there for a good 30 minutes, just staring at the screen, feeling my chest tighten with every second. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned off my phone and splashed cold water on my face, trying to snap myself out of it. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. I looked exhausted, worn out. I couldn't go on like this much longer. I thought about calling one of my buddies and spilling the whole story, but something stopped me. The embarrassment, maybe. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to hear what they'd say. Would they tell me to leave her? To confront her? Hell, I didn't even know what I wanted at this point. All I knew was that I felt completely alone, with no one to talk to and no way to get out of this mess without tearing my life apart. But things finally came to a head last night. Megan told me she was going out with some friends from work, which, in hindsight, seemed like her way of covering her tracks. I don't even know if there were any friends involved. She left around 7, dressed in an outfit that looked like she was ready to hit the club rather than have a casual night out. I didn't question it, just nodded and watched her leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being honest with me. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed her laptop again. This time, I was determined to find out how much money she was making from all this. I opened her profile and checked her account information, noting that she'd been receiving payments for months, thousands of dollars in total. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Here we were, budgeting every month, watching our spending, while she was raking in cash on the side and keeping it all to herself. But there was something else that made my stomach drop. She had messages. Lots of them. I clicked on a recent one, and the guy on the other end was, well, let's just say he wasn't there for polite conversation. They were setting up private sessions and talking like they were old friends. And Megan was flirting back, joking, laughing, like this was all just some normal part of her day. I stared at the screen, numb with shock, until my mind couldn't take it anymore. I shut the laptop and sat in silence, my head spinning. I was in way over my head, but there was no way out now. Whatever came next, I knew I couldn't go back to pretending. I barely remember the hours that passed after I saw those messages. My mind was a haze of anger, hurt, and confusion. How could she act like we were this happy, normal couple when she was sharing pieces of herself, intimate, personal pieces, with total strangers? And the money. She'd been lying to my face about that too. Thousands of dollars, all while telling me she'd been picking up extra freelance work to help us save for the future. When Megan came home that night, I was still on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, trying to keep it together. She walked in, gave me a quick, slightly awkward smile, and headed to the kitchen, like she always did after coming home. It hit me how normal this all felt to her, like she'd been living this double life for so long that it didn't even make her flinch. I knew I couldn't keep it in anymore. I was done pretending. Without saying a word, I stood up and followed her into the kitchen. She was pulling out a glass of water when I finally spoke. Megan, we need to talk. She looked up, surprised. Is everything okay? The way she asked, all casual, like nothing was going on, it was almost enough to make me laugh. No, Megan. It's not okay. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Her face went pale, and she set down the glass, her hand shaking just slightly. What do you mean? You really want me to spell it out? Fine. I know about the videos. I know about the messages, the money, the private sessions. I know everything, Megan. Her mouth opened and closed like she was struggling for words, but nothing came out. I could see the shock, the guilt, maybe even a little fear, flicker across her face. She knew she was caught. She took a shaky breath, looking down at the floor. I didn't want you to find out like this. Really? I laughed bitterly. Then how exactly were you planning for me to find out? Or were you just going to keep this going forever, lying to my face while you shared our life with strangers? She didn't answer. She just stood there, her face crumbling, as if realizing the damage she'd done. Finally, she whispered, I'm sorry. Sorry? I snapped. You're sorry? That's it? You've been lying to me for months. Do you have any idea what this feels like? You kept all of this from me. Why, Megan? Why couldn't you just talk to me? Tears started streaming down her face. I didn't think you'd understand. I felt like I wasn't enough, like I had to do something to feel alive, I guess. Alive? I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. And what about us? Our marriage? Did that just mean nothing to you? She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. At first, it was just extra money. I thought it would be harmless. But then people started messaging me, and I don't know, I just got caught up in it. I took a step back, my hands clenched into fists, struggling to hold back the tidal wave of emotions crashing over me. You got caught up in it? So, what? This was just a phase? A side gig? And I'm supposed to just understand? Megan looked up, her face full of desperation. I know I messed up, Chris. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I don't want to lose you over this. Please, we can get through this. We can go to therapy, work on things. I'll stop all of it, I swear. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, feeling like I didn't even know this person standing in front of me. Therapy? She wanted therapy to fix the fact that she betrayed me on such a massive level? The thought of pretending like everything could just go back to normal was almost laughable. Do you even realize what you're asking? I said, my voice raw. I can't just unsee all of this, Megan. I can't just pretend that you didn't break every ounce of trust one had in you. She took a step toward me, reaching out, but I pulled back. Chris, please, just give me a chance to make it right. We can work through this. I love you. Love? I laughed bitterly. If this is what love looks like, then I don't think I want any part of it anymore. I turned away, not able to look at her face any longer, and headed to the bedroom. I grabbed a bag and started packing, shoving clothes in without really looking at them. I heard her come to the doorway, her voice choked and pleading. Chris, please don't leave. Let's talk about this. We can figure it out. Just don't walk away. But I couldn't stay. Not after everything I'd seen, everything she'd said. She'd torn my heart apart, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to trust her again. As I zipped up the bag, I took one last look at her, standing there with tears streaming down her face, looking as broken as I felt. But for once, I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. I walked past her, through the living room, and out the front door without looking back. And now, here I am, alone in a friend's guest room, trying to figure out where to go from here. Part of me still can't believe this is real, that I walked out on my wife, that our marriage ended over something so insane. I'm not even sure what's next. Therapy, maybe, for me, but definitely not for us. I just need to learn how to pick up the pieces and figure out if I can ever move on from this betrayal. Right now, I feel like I'll never trust anyone again.